Hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Achieving Excellence in OH&S with ISO 45001. My name is Gus Oliveira, and I'm an International Product and Market Manager here at SoftExpert. Today's webinar will be presented by Mr. Stephen Asbury. Stephen has over 30 years of experience in OH&S management systems. He is a speaker and has also authored 5 books. He has published several articles and white papers on safe and risk management. I wish you all a great webinar.
Hello everyone and good afternoon. I'm Stephen Asbury and I'm speaking to you from the Midlands of the United Kingdom. We have an excellent audience today and I'd like to welcome you all to our session. We have 4 main objectives today, and these are exactly as they were published on your enrolment site. And we're going to start off by taking a look at understanding what business is all about. Obviously, we could spend many hours doing that. We're going to spend just a little piece of time giving you some thoughts as to how you might understand the business prior to any implementation of any management system. We're going to have a look at the origins of management systems, where they come from, how they work, and give you some, I hope you'll find, very useful tools to help you remember how to use them well. And as my colleague Susanna was just saying, our third objective is to have a good look at the structure of ISO 45001. Of course, let me remind you, the structure is still in draft. I'll be using the very latest information we have on the evolution of that standard, as well as giving you some predictions as to when you're likely to see it. And finally, towards the end of the session, I'd like to share with you, and it will be quite briefly, learning from a couple of case studies that I've been involved in to give you the opportunity to see the sorts of benefits you and your organization might get from implementing such a standard. So we said we'd take a look at the essence of business and the essence of enterprise and what they're all like. I suppose most organizations that are big today started off small once, when some entrepreneurs may well have got together with a great idea which gets developed. They go to the bank or they go to a stock market. If it's smaller, perhaps they go to friends or their parents and find the money that they need to purchase their assets, to recruit the staff, and it's at this point that their big plan for the business starts to sort out. Over here on the right side of the screen, I've given some examples of the sorts of objectives that people at the start of businesses commonly have. Of course, they revise year on year on year on year, the mission, the direction that the organization is heading in, and you see some of the examples of the types of things that people say here. You'll see at the bottom the whole idea of being incident-free. And of course, over time, the organization will develop, it will get more and more aligned to its objectives. And a really good question is, what is it that gets organizations from the left here over to the right? I ask you to put into your mind, do you believe that every organization is equally successful? I guess like me, you've put a company into your mind, maybe you've read about it in the newspaper. You can do that almost any day in the world these days where something has gone wrong. The thing, it seems to me, that makes it the most likely that organizations will be successful in the transition from their good ideas to achieving their objectives is the use of structure in their means of control. And of course, we use all sorts of different structures. Again, I've given some examples. If you're involved in quality, you may well have heard of ISO 9001. If you're involved in finance, you might well have heard of the Companies Act that gives a structure, a legal structure in your territory. Of course, we've got our health and safety standards, and of course there are lots of others for things like IT and security, environmental management. These have got to work at normal times, also when it's an abnormal period of business, and also at times of emergency, all underpinned by company policies and procedures. And over time, organizations tend to drive themselves towards continual improvement. And the view I take is all of this is for the benefit of 5 very particular groups of people. Take a look at the first ones here. These are the investors, and whether this is friends or parents, whether it's the bank, or whether it's the people who've come to a stock market looking for an asset to invest in, at some point they're going to want their money back. The investors are a very important part of the reasons that organizations must be successful. Of course, then we've got the employees. Employees very keen to keep their jobs, to have job security, salary increases, and all the benefits of working for an organization that is successful and achieving its objectives. Of course, we have other people working in the organization. They could be contractors, they could be suppliers, and all of those know that if they're working with a successful organization, well, they too will share in the success too. I think it's reasonable to say that they share the fate of your organization. Fourth group, you'll see them, are the customers of the organization. Of course, they want things like delivery on time at a reasonable price, at a good standard of quality that they can tick the excellent box to time and time again, and satisfied customers are of course much more likely to recommend you to others. That's another means by which organizations grow. And in the global society, the global village in which we all live, where news travels so fast, society too has great expectations for organizations, whether it's the creation of jobs or whether it's payment for taxes to pay for health service, security and defense, and so on. So on my travels around the world, and I've worked in consulting for over 30 years, I hear many people talk about 0 incidents. Here's a map of our fabulous planet in a way that suggests that 0 incidents might be the reality. Of course, what we see when we open the newspaper, what we turn on the news, is bangs and explosions and leakage and losses and all sorts of things that can go terribly wrong. Time prohibits us from looking at each of these on the screen. We do record these webinars if you'd like to take a look at any of these again later on. The color coding here says that anything that's black is probably a business financial issue. The ones that are color coded in green, they are the ones that are largely environmental related corporate disasters, and then the ones that are in red, either fully or partially in red, are ones where occupational health and safety has been the impact. But many of these are things that I call black swans, and we'll come to black swans. These are the things that are very, very unlikely, but are very serious when they occur. We'll have a look at that category of risk in just a moment or two. Now we're going to move on now to our next objective, to have a look at the origins of management systems. They go back a long way, something of the order of 2,500 years. We go back to the Zhou dynasty of ancient China, where there was a very successful warrior. You'll see his name at the top, Sun Tzu, or General Sun Tzu. China was growing a lot at this time, and Sun Tzu seemed to be so much more successful on the battlefield than other people. And only as recently, early as 1901, have we discovered just why Sun Tzu was so successful. In 1901, we found a script of a book alleged to have been written by Sun Tzu. It's called The Art of War. It's probably the 3rd most well-read book in the world today. Only the Holy Bible and the Holy Quran stand above this in terms of the number of readers, and it's been read by many military strategists and members of government and so on, and even our friend down here seems to have found it to be an interesting read. The book is all about how to win the war, how to plan for success. For example, it would not be wise to walk your troops onto the battlefield without knowing the size and strength of the enemy. A battle plan, a means by which the war is to be conducted, a means by which you can move the troops, influence their behavior, whether they're advancing, holding the ground or retreating during the battle, and then learning after the battle. A management system for success in warfare. It goes back 2,500 years. And if we bring the evolution of management systems a little more up to date, we come to meet somebody called Dr. Deming. William Edwards Deming, born in Sioux City, Iowa. There it is on the map in the United States of America in the year 1900. A very bright kid, went to school, went to university afterwards, graduated in statistics, and found himself working for the US government. There was a very significant event in 1945 in the country of Japan. It ended the Second World War, and Deming found himself in 1946 in Japan on behalf of the American government, finding out how when Japanese industrialism would develop once again. And what he noted in Japan was a very different approach to what he'd seen in his own country. He noticed a great tendency to planning activities, and when those activities were to be carried out, well, they were implemented exactly in accordance with the plan. During the implementation of the plan, there would be all manner of checking taking on. Deming notes in his famous book, Out of the Crisis. I recommend that as a read if you're interested in this evolution that we're discussing. 10 years after this, Deming writes Out of the Crisis, and he says that specialist checkers, instead of taking the checking data away to their departments and sorting it and filing it, the checking data, how well things were being done, was used by management to influence progress in the future. And it is in the book, Out of the Crisis, that this cycle, this circle that you see here, is published for the very first time. Very much known as the Deming cycle. Some people call it the Deming wheel. Plan, do, check, and then act. And you'll see that cycle, how it turns round and round and round. We'll simplify that. You'll see it on the screen here. The 4 elements that are the dynamics, really, of any management system that you might be using right now. I've got 2 or 3 examples I'd like to share with you just to prove how this simple model of PDCA can be used to understand any management system. And there's Deming at the bottom there, no longer with us. If I have any regrets, it's that I didn't get the chance to meet him. Our working lifetimes were just separated by, I think, too many years. Let's make this proof here. The current standard, and some of you might well be using this, or if not using it, you may be familiar with it, is OHSAS 18001 of 2007. It's owned by some certification bodies, and many people regard it as the world's most common current occupational health and safety management system. It's got a number of sections in it. I've picked out the 5 main headline sections. Usually somebody asks, where is section 4.1? The truth is there is a section 4.1, but it just describes the general requirements. There is nothing particular that needs to be implemented. Let's take a look at each of these clauses in turn. In section 4.2, we have the requirement for there to be an occupational health and safety policy, a leadership standard that sets out the requirements that top management has for the rest of the organization, typically be signed by a member of top management within the last year or two. Section point 3 deals with the detailed planning for the implementation of the management system. It's a risk-based planning, so we'll be looking extremely briefly at risk assessment later on. Our future seminar series, our webinar series, will include sessions on risk assessment, and if you're interested in them, I would encourage you to come along. Following section 4.3, we have our section 4.4, and here we have a look at the implementation and the operation of those detailed plans. In there we're going to have the training of the staff, right the way through the communication, all the way through operational control, and finishing with the implementation when required of the emergency plan. Section 4.5 deals with checking, and the final section of 4.6 leads to the review by senior management. And you'll see some color coding here. What you see in the green is what Dr. Deming would see as the plan. The black text illustrates the do. The red text illustrates the check. And finally, we have our management review. That is where management takes a look at what we've learned on our journey so far, picks out the areas where improvement is needed, and uses them to drive future policy and future planning, and so the cycle continues. I've picked out a couple of similar standards that some people may be familiar with. The OGP is the International Oil and Gas Producers Group. Some years ago they produced the HSE management system for the 40 members of this group, and as you take a look around that circle, we don't have time to go through every section, but what I hope you'll see very quickly is the planning elements, you'll see the doing elements, you'll see there the implementation, the monitoring or the checking, and the review that leads to continual improvement in the future. This is the final example for now of a common management system that some people may be familiar with. ILO is the International Labour Organization, an executive agency of the United Nations. That's all of your countries and my country too, and generally speaking, the 2001 OSH standard is a cycle that looks like this, that starts with policy organizing and planning, takes us to implementation or the do, the evaluation or check, and the action that drives continual improvement. So that's been our journey from 2,500 years ago until about April 2012. And in April 2012, something quite significant happened. I do come across quite a lot of practitioners that haven't heard about this, so don't feel bad if you haven't. You would probably be in the majority. In April 2012, a new standard was published by the International Standards Organization. It's commonly called Annex SL, and it provides a high-level framework for all management system standards owned by ISO from their next revision. So some of you may know ISO 9001, the quality standard, has already been revised to align to Annex SL. If we have anyone in our audience today that's interested in environmental management systems, ISO 14001 may sound familiar, and just a year or so ago, September 2015, that too was reissued, aligned to the 10 clauses of Annex SL. And very much ISO 45001 standard, the one that we're waiting for right now, when it's published, is going to align very closely to these high-level framework standards. So the ones in black are the ones that I would encourage you to worry less about. I would encourage you to think very closely about 4 through 10, and the bright people listening here may well say, well, this looks a lot like a Deming wheel. It absolutely is a lot like the Deming wheel, but before we try and interspace these sections into a picture that will help you remember it, let's just take a look at the timeline of what's going to happen, or so we think. So the absolute published intention of 45,001 is to replace OHSAS 18,001. So when one arrives, the other will disappear, and I have no doubt that will happen. The committee that's leading the development, you'll see it noted at the top, ISO PC 283. These discussions for the development have been going on since October 2013, and then you'll see the timeline rolling down the page. The first committee draft and its date, the draft international standard published February 2015. That was a consultation. There were 2,400 comments sent into PC 283 for their deliberation. Those comments were discussed at a meeting in Barbados, lovely place, and it resulted in the first draft international standard of January 2016. The ballot closed on the 12th of May 2016, and you know, it was so close to being adopted. 71% voted for the standard, 28% voted against. There was a 1% abstention rate. The requirements for that standard to have been passed were that 2/3 should be in favour, and well, it cleared that hurdle, but also there should be no more than 1/4 against, and there were 28% against. So incredibly close. We nearly had our standard then, but as it did not achieve sufficient support, there is a redrafting going on now. So that started in Canada. It moved on to Lithuania. The next meeting of PC 283 is going to be in Austria between the 6th and the 10th of February. And members of that committee, and I'm really very close to that, we're expecting a further draft in June 2017. Then there'll be another vote. The same rules apply, 2/3 in favour and no more than 1/4 against. And well, we hope that that will result in agreement, probably no earlier than October of next year, October 2017. But I wouldn't put the house on that. It's possible. I've heard this from a couple of the committee members say that it could be early 2018 before it arrives. So now we're going to make some predictions. Here is Stephen Asbury's prediction for what ISO 45001 will look like. So the words you'll see in here might look very common, very familiar. They come directly from Annex SL. We're going to have our planning elements of leadership and detailed planning. So some familiar things will be in there. Section 5.2 will be the occupational health and safety policy. 5.3 will be for roles and responsibilities to be set out. In section 6.1, I suspect, we're going to have our hazard identification and risk assessment that gives us our plan for the priorities. Moving round to the right-hand side, the do, we're going to have to do some training of our staff. I suspect that'll be 7.2. And then in 8.1, we're going to have our control processes, the hierarchy of control, management of contractors, outsourcing, procurement. We'll have our contractors in there too, and also the emergency preparedness and response. In section 9, the performance evaluation, we're going to have all the monitoring. So the active and reactive monitoring and the audit will live in there. And then in section 10, well, that's where we'll have our incident reporting And when we take all that information, dial it round in a circle, this is the tool that gives us our continual improvement. We set the scene at the start of this session. I was talking about what the business is trying to achieve. I was setting the scene for this new word called context. And context means a good understanding of the external environment in which the organization is working, politically, economically, socially, and technically, as well as the organization's internal characteristics, strengths, its weaknesses, its opportunities, and any threats in there. And I'm going to define what we mean by a management system. It's got 4 elements of control. The first part here is that we've learned over our industrial history that the best means of getting from the start to the objectives are with a structured means. Does that guarantee 0 incidents? I would argue not, but it gives us a reasonable assurance. And of course, it's each company, your companies listening to this webinar, to decide how much assurance you need. If we have a structured means, we will meet our objectives. And the final part you'll see is to satisfy the responsibilities to all 5 groups of their stakeholders, not just the employees, not just the contractors, not just the investors, not just the customers, but all of them, as well as meeting the expectations to society. I'm going to have a look very, very briefly at that black swan phrase that I used earlier on. These are increasingly in the world a characteristic of some of the losses we see. Do come on our risk assessment webinar if you'd like to know more about this. But anyone that's done risk assessments before knows that we measure the likelihood of things occurring from great likelihood to very low likelihood, as well as measuring the severity from very unlikely to very likely. And when we put those 2 things together, things that are unlikely and should they occur would be of low severity, we tend to call those low risk. Whereas things that seem more likely and where the outcome would be unpleasant, either financially or in terms of a safety outcome or an environmental outcome or a health outcome, where they're more serious, we tend to call those the high risks. And these are the ones that would normally feature in the business planning. Now, here's the black swan. You'll see it sits in a different place of the matrix to where many people have thought about risk over the years. These are the things that can seriously hurt companies. In many companies, the belief is because they're so unlikely, they sort of manage themselves. But my picture of the world earlier on suggests that black swan risks should also be managed with a structured means of control. Now, where we have an area of risk, the black swan area and the higher, some of the medium risks too probably, we do get 4 choices as to how to reduce, how to attend to these risks. So here's the first choice. If you don't like the risk, stop doing it. Terminate the activity. I think also a case here for new projects might be to not even start them if you are unhappy with the level of risk involved. Then we have the second choice here, and that's to treat the risk. You'll see here in my little green bubble, how do we treat a risk? Well, if it's an occupational health and safety risk, my advice to you would be to use a recognized structured means of control, and you'll see 4 to 10 the clauses of Annex SL, which will be the clauses of ISO 45001, which we're going to see in the next year or so. There are some other choices. Our third choice is to try and transfer the risk to somebody else. Examples of this might be to have a joint venture with someone in the territory who knows more about the business environment there than you do. Also, the classic risk transfer is to insurance, transferring an unknown risk for a very known fixed premium. And then the final category is to tolerate, to take, to accept in a knowing way the risk. And in many organizations it is true that the higher level of risk is referred to senior levels of management for greater approval. Terminate, treat, transfer and tolerate, the four approaches to risk reduction and risk control. We call those the 4 T's. I think the final thing I'd like to talk with you about this afternoon is where audit fits in to all of this. Now, we'll have a future seminar, a webinar covering audit. Again, if you find the subject of audit interesting, I would absolutely encourage you to sign up, to enroll for our session on auditing. What we have, of course, is a management team, I trust, committed to achieving its published objectives. And what management believes is that an occupational health and safety management system will help it to be successful in that regard. It's truly a two-way street. A sensible management team will have auditors in an audit team that come and take an independent look at the operation of that management system from time to time. The number of auditors will depend on how much assurance the organization wants. The number of days that this audit team will be looking at the operation of the management system likewise will depend upon the amount of assurance that management needs. And the output from the audit team will be a report that points out to management a level of assurance. We use this little reminder of the role of audit. I is to remind us that it should be independent. I think auditing your best friend is a very difficult thing to do. Auditing someone whose department you'd like to work for next, or auditing your boss, is very difficult to be able to independently tell the truth what you find. W is well balanced. It means we don't just want more training, more manuals, more procedures, more drills. The amount of control should be proportionate to the amount of risk. The international community calls this a LARP, as low as reasonably practicable. And the A is to remind us that auditors should provide work that is appropriate to the needs of the organization. Again, audit is part of the continual improvement drive in organizations. And I'd like to share with you, as I said at the start, as you may have seen in the session objectives, a couple of case studies that illustrate this improvement opportunity. So in our first case study, we're going to look at a big international organization. They have something of the order of 60,000 employees around the world, and they have operations in 96 countries. With just a couple of countries in the world, a couple of hundred countries in the world, well, these people are almost everywhere. They're bound to have an operation near you. And in the second case study, we're going to have a look at a Middle Eastern oil and gas producer that becomes the IOGP, the International Oil and Gas Producers' #1 performer in health and safety terms. So let's take a look at the characteristics of our first company. They were established a long time ago, you'll see here, way back in 1844, for a very long time, way over 150 years. Their operations were left to local management to determine. 96 countries, there were 96 different occupational health and safety management systems. At the strong end, they had some 18,001 management systems implemented informally, and in some of these territories they had absolutely nothing. 60,000 staff, about 2 million people from the public are also on the premises of this big organization every day. And for over 150 years, the organization pretty much had no data until there was an occasional fatality or an occasional serious road traffic incident or an occasional major fire, and then everybody heard about what had happened. And the organization decided there was a change of leadership, some change in ownership, and they decided to do things a little differently. As you can see, they appointed a senior vice president to lead global safety approaches. They created a group, Occupational Health and Safety Management System Standard, aligned to our standard here, 18001. 38 specific standards that they required each of their operations around the world to follow, and 6 monthly self-assessments for each of those operations to advise top management what had and what had not been done. And they absolutely used those self-assessments to target an audit program. So they targeted the people at one end of the spectrum who looked perhaps too good to be true, to be sure that they were indeed doing all the things that they said they were doing, and they also focused where the feedback was that not much had been done, seeking to provide assistance and support. It took them about 4.5, almost 5 years to properly implement this management system here, to the extent that by 2015 they won a ROSPA Bronze Award. In 2016 they won a ROSPA Silver Award for occupational health and safety, and I can tell you that right now that organization is using the journey towards gold as a global communication standard. The truth is, this is not just about winning awards. It has reduced in fewer serious accidents. It has reduced the number of minor accidents. The program has reduced the number of road traffic accidents, and the performance, including reduced lost time from work, is now included in the PLC report to shareholders. I'd like to show you briefly what the safety world knows as the culture ladder. You know, the idea of at the bottom, who cares as long as we're not caught, working towards ever higher standards of cultural awareness, right up to health and safety is how we do business around here. And that theoretical model for cultural improvement seems to me to be absolutely how this organization has used occupational health and safety management systems and structured means of control to drive that improvement. Now, I'm very conscious that we're at the 40-minute mark. We're a little longer than we said. I would like to just share with you some findings of our second case study, and then I will be very happy to take any questions either this afternoon. If we don't get round to your questions, I assure you we'll respond to them in writing in the next few days. Case study 2 is a much newer organization. It's in the energy sector. It was established 15 years ago, and it produces 36 million tons of LNG per year. It's got some gas production lines. It produces a huge amount of the world's helium and ships it around the world to countries like yours and mine in a fleet of 27 large vessels. There's 3,500 people involved, and I'd like to tell you their story of using occupational health and safety management systems. Their client, our client's health and safety manager, attended our health and safety management systems class in Houston, Texas in 2010. I was actually the tutor of the class. It was a 5-day class. He came to see me on the 4th day. He said, "Stephen, is it possible that you could bespoke this class to include our very specific procedures and systems?" We did exactly that. We ran some pilot sessions in the early part of 2011. We made quite a lot of refinements in those sessions, and ever since then we've been running those classes for their workforce. You'll see we've run 45 sessions. Over 1,000 people have attended those classes, almost a third of the total workforce. And along that journey, it's a 6-year journey, this client of ours has become one of the safest companies in the oil and gas sector in the world. It has world-class FAR, fatal accident rate. It has a world-class LTIR, the lost time injury rate, and it has world-class TRIR, the total recordable incident rate. Time doesn't really permit us to go into the fine details of everything showing on the chart here. I'm going to pick out just a few examples that you might wish to put your eyes upon. And I also included a few photographs, and if you look carefully you might pick me out. I'm the guy in the top right hand corner in the blue shirt, leaning on that black wall. But these are some of the participants on the classes, an extremely international audience. I think the company has 58 nationalities working for it, and it's been an extremely positive program. So I'm going to conclude by thanking you for joining us. Many of the things that I've talked about this afternoon you'll find in my 5 books. Books 1 and book 3, reading from the left to the right, are my books about management systems for occupational health and safety and auditing. They're the ones that I would steer you towards if you wanted to read about them. Book 2 and book 5 are about corporate social responsibility. So a management systems approach, yes, to health and safety, but to all the other areas of corporate responsibility too. And then book 4 there with the egg timer on it is my book about dynamic risk assessment and its links to the other types of assessment. Once again, thank you for joining us, and I'm going to hand you back now to my colleagues.
Thank you all for taking part in this presentation. If you have any questions or if you would like to get in touch with Mr. Asbury, please email him at stevenasbury@sky.com. For more webinars, please visit our website at www.softexpert.com. See you next time.